All right, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Hope everyone can hear me. If not, we are going to be recording this and sending it to you. So, you'll at least have that copy. This is our final webinar for the year end, tackling the finance module. And I'll just keep it within the hour, and I'll just hang back if anybody has any additional questions or anything that they'd like me to go into more detail on. So whatever your questions are, I'll make sure they'll get answered either within this webinar or in an email. Speaking of which, and there it is, that they are all recorded, and they are available on our resource center, our YouTube channel, and if you are supported, then you'll be able to access these training videos within the actual software of Shepherd staff. And in addition, anybody who's present and has registered today, they'll be getting a webinar emailed to them. So that is good. My name is Taylor. I'm a support technician here at Concordia Technology Solutions. I've been here going on about 2.5 years. I'm loving it. I never thought that I'd be able to tackle technology as well as helping churches. So this was just a match made in heaven, in my opinion, a real blessing. So if you guys have any questions, anything specific that I didn't cover, feel free to just reach out to me using my email or my phone. So please feel free to use those direct lines, in addition to contacting software support for any other technicians as well. So we have muted all of our phones and microphones just to keep the spotlight on me, and just make sure no interruptions. But if you have any questions in your little webinar window, you can put in some questions. I did see a lot of people who got here a little early helping me set up. So yep, just use those little question little area. And if I don't answer it within the actual webinar, then my friend and colleague, Jordan Bogart, he'll be able to answer them within the chat. And anything he doesn't get to will just stay for a question and answer session, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions you guys might have. So that is his information. And so just to reiterate, if you do enjoy this webinar, my name is Taylor. And if you did not like this webinar and need to critique it, my name is Jordan. So just a little bit of an overview, just going to go over our class agenda. Just a basic overview of all the processes that you're going to be doing throughout your finance module at the year end. Then we're just going to have a bit of a discussion. I'm just going to go into some reporting, some tasks, and once that's all finished, I'm just going to go over a small little review for year end. And we'll have a small little quiz. It's just 3 questions. I'm not going to send them to your pastor and tattle on you, so just feel free to just answer whatever comes to mind. And then after that quiz, we'll just wrap up, and any other questions that I didn't get to, then I am more than happy to stay after. I am going to try and keep it within an hour, but I am willing to stay here for as long as it takes. So we're just going to go over our year-end overview. Those who had seen the previous 2 webinars will be pretty well versed in this by now. Just a light retelling of how to just optimize and rebuild your database at the end of the year, how to make sure that you have a backup, because it's very important to have a backup just as a relay point in case something happens. And then we'll just be going straight into the finance module. So we'll be tackling budgets, we'll be doing reconciliation, making sure everything is reconciled as much as possible. Then we'll be going over our reports. That will probably be a big chunk of our time. And then running the actual year-end utility, which is the only utility that's actually required within this software, due to finance being the only one using a fiscal year. And then after we finish that year-end utility, we do have a cleanup utility like all the other modules, and that is just completely optional if we need to remove or purge data, or if we just want to keep that data for historical purposes. So we'll just go ahead and get it started. Right here in the middle, we have our Shepherd Staff software. I will double click it right here. And this is our new login screen. If you still have the stained glass window, then you are not on the newest version right now. So things might look a little different as far as the login screen. We are in the middle of a rewrite. We have not gotten to finance yet, so it's going to be pretty much the same as it was all the previous years. And we're hoping that sometime next year, we'll be able to finish that rewrite once we release our contribution module later or earlier in the year next year. So it's always important before you run your year end to always make sure that you run a backup, and this is especially important for financial records because you just do not want to make any sort of mistakes, and it's just better just not take risks when you have all of this important financial data. So when you're on this login screen, you can go up here to utilities, and if you're still on the stained glass window, there will be a utilities option as well. And once you choose that, there should be an option to back up this database. So once you go ahead, back up this database, you can't back up too many times. You can just back up just one too few. So anytime you enter in a lot of data or make a lot of changes, you want to back it up and make sure that you don't have to redo all of that work if something happens to the database. So here we have start the backup. You can use the location that you can choose once you click this button. I also want to point out that you have the option to flag finance as being checked out. This is something entirely independent from backing up or restoring a database. But even if this is checked, anytime you do a backup, it's always going to be of the entire database. So if you create a backup, it's going to essentially create a zip file for your database, and that will include both your finance information as well as all of the other modules, even if you choose just to restore your finance module. And speaking of which, if you do ever need to restore your database, you will need to log in, or at least put in your credentials here, and then you'll be able to restore the database back up. And if you are only working in the finance module, you do have the option to restore only the finance module. So it will still be a full database, but if you restore only the finance data will be imported, and it will leave the rest of the modules alone. So after you are in this login screen, you can always make sure you check for updates. If you have any problems with updates, just please let us know. And we'll just go ahead and just log in. So I do have my sysadmin information in here. So I am the administrator in here. So if you see anything that's grayed out, chances are you just don't have permission or something's not set up within your finance module, and that's perfectly fine. But you know, it just might look a little different from what you're seeing in this webinar. So just so you can see the full screen, I'll go ahead and stop my webcam. It just kind of increases that screen just a little bit. And so once we go ahead and log into our Shepherd Staff system, we can go up here to the F icon to open up finance. So as of right now, once the new contribution module comes up, everything is going to open up kind of like in a window within itself. So, you know, everything will just be within itself. But as of right now, for contributions and finance for this year end, it's going to open it up, and it's going to be the same module as the previous version. So very little has changed. So I didn't want anybody to worry for updating, at least for the finance module. So the finance module, you can really run this year end whenever, but I would want to make sure that any sort of contribution batches, if you create any deposits from an offering batch, you want to make sure that all of those are posted, just so that you have all of your transactions, so that all of your reports are the same. So we do definitely recommend making sure you have your contributions, attendance, and membership data finished. Scheduler and finance, they have quite a bit of wiggle room. Like I said, as long as the contributions have been posted, then you can just go ahead and run this financial year end whenever it is convenient for you. So let's see. So first things first, just had to look at my list, make sure what I promised to show you. First, we can just make sure that all checks, deposits, and journal entries, all of your transactions for the year have been entered. So anything that you have, any money that you've moved in one way or another, you want to make sure that everything is accounted for. So you can always open up your registers, make sure everything is in there. Not everything has to be reconciled, but you probably still want to make sure that any and all transactions have been entered within the program, just so that we're just up to date as much as we can. So up here you see the church dashboard came up. This is just kind of a quick glance sort of thing. You don't have to worry about it, but just sometimes on startup that does appear. And to the left is the chart of accounts tree. So I always think this is very, very helpful. You can always just tell it to expand, and it will show all of your accounts. And then if you select a specific account, then you'll be able to look at the ledger for this particular account. And if it is an income or expense account, you have the option to enter in budgets. So naturally, budgets only go into income and expense accounts. So when you select an income account, it will open up the ledger, but nothing right here. And once you have that selected, if you go down a little further, there is this sort of little white graph here that you can click to open up the budget. So this is just kind of a much more upfront way on opening up the budget. Another way to open it up would be to go up here to the accounts window. This will have all of your accounts. And once you have something selected, you can click the budget button down here and it'll take you to the exact same place. So it's just all about preference on whether you decide to use the chart of account tree or just use the account window. So as far as budgets, you can add and edit budgets at any time. So it does not matter when you put it in. You know, really it's just as long as you put it in before the year end, honestly. And throughout the year, if you put it in early and things change, you can definitely just open this back up and you can edit your budget whenever it is that you need. So first off, we would need to choose your fiscal year. So as of right now, you know, we have 2021 already. So since I don't see a 2022, I'm going to have to add that actual budget. So to add a budget, if you don't see it in this drop-down menu, you're going to go down here to the Add button. And it's going to ask you exactly what fiscal year you want to add. So we're going to say 2022 for right now. And with that fiscal year determined, you can go over here and change things on a month-to-month basis if you want. If you have specific budgets for specific months, if you have more of a total that you want to be split up between the months, or a different way of calculating budgets, you can go down here to the Project and Copy button. It's a handy dandy little tool. If you click here, then it will give you different calculation methods that you can calculate your budget on. So you can either just copy last year's budget, it'll just move last year's to this year, so just copying it. You can project from some totals or copy from the totals. And any basing it on the last year's totals as well. This one being just considering last year's actuals and past actuals, that will look for a trend. Or you could just do equal monthly amounts. So if I know that the total budget for this account in all is, say, $1,200, and I click OK, it's going to know that all of the months are going to have an equal amount. So it's going to give $100 for each of them. And even when you have everything in here, you are more than welcome to edit it as well. So really, once all of your budgets look good, then you can just go ahead and click OK, and that will save your budget. And you'll want to do all of your income and expense accounts just to make sure that everything has been accounted for. So I'll go ahead and exit out of here. Another important thing, in addition to making sure all of your transactions have been entered into the system, you're going to want to make sure that everything is, all of these transactions are also reconciled to the best of your ability. Now, naturally, not everything is going to have to be cleared by the end of the year in order for you to do your year end. But you want to make sure that everything's just kind of double checked. You're not required by any means to actually run that reconciliation tool, but it's always a good double check. In order to get to the bank reconciliation, if you go up to the uppermost toolbar and click Accounts, then we have bank account reconciliation right here. So I'll click on that, and you'll be able to choose the account that you need. You'll be able to choose your oldest transaction. It might be different from whatever is entered into your statement. So even if the statement says that it was at the beginning of this month, it might have been entered into Shepherd Staff at an earlier date. So you want to make sure that all of your transactions, when you look at transactions to clear, everything is included. So once you have these two date ranges, you'll make sure to put the beginning and ending balance from your bank statement. And once all of these are filled in, I need to fill in that just for fun. Once we click in that, then we can go over here to the transactions to clear, and then you can select any and all of the transactions that are on your bank statement. So you don't want to mark them as cleared unless they're on your bank statement. You can just go ahead and go with that. You're going to want to make sure that your difference is at 0 before you're able to actually post this reconciliation. All of our other webinars for finance that goes into much greater detail as far as bank reconciliation. I just kind of wanted to give a little refresher course, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to support, and we're happy to work with you. So once you go ahead and reconcile all of your bank accounts as much as you can, then really, as long as your budgets and your transactions are already here, then it's time for reporting, honestly. So up here in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that there are reports. And you just have a list of things to choose from. The main points would probably be things like statement of income expense, balance sheet, general ledger, and each one does give you quite a bit of freedom as far as formatting. So for the statement of income and expense, you can take a look here and choose your fund. A fund is different from the contribution fund, as a fund in finance is just your book of accounts. So this fund is including all of your accounts that are within this account tree. Naturally, for the year end, you want to make sure that the month is the last month of the year, just so everything is accounted for. You have the option to save the month as well as include inactive accounts if you want that extra information. And then what I find helpful is it has a lot of ability for format and style, in my opinion. For formatting, there are many different structures that you can choose from. Some people prefer the treasurer's report, others just need budget and actual. Just a few different canned reports that you can choose from so that you can dictate exactly how you want your report to look like. You can also choose whether or not you want to include account numbers or just partial numbers as well, or if you just want the account name, that's usually just fine. For your budget format, you can choose between annual and year to date. Again, it's just completely up to your preference. If you ever preview your report and it's not showing enough detail, I would make sure that you use this drop-down menu and choose account. So that is the most level of detail, so that when you ever look at this, then it will show each and every account underneath their major and minor groups. So this is pretty upfront. If there's something that's just not being shown, then feel free to reach out to support and we'll be happy to help however we can. But with these canned reports, not much can be changed within the actual report itself, unless you want to maybe export it to Word and just kind of copy and paste as you need. But once you have your print preview, you can print, you can export to either Word, and you can also export to Excel. Sometimes it doesn't really mesh well with Excel, but if it helps you with further calculations, then that might be an option. So in addition to the statement of income and expense, we would also want to make sure that the balance sheet is correct. So we would select that. And just like the income and expense, we want to make sure that the report month is at the end, just to take into account all transactions. You can choose whether or not to show just the balance sheet for the current year or the prior year, or make some sort of comparison as well. Also, another level of detail that you can choose to account for the most amount of detail. And really, you just kind of need to just tinker with it. Once everything looks good, you can preview. And then you can review those balances to make sure everything is looking the way it needs to be. So there is also the general ledger that you will most likely want to print or keep. It's pretty straightforward. It just shows all of your transactions throughout the year. You just choose your date range. And if you choose, instead of summarizing, you can choose to show details, and that will give you more options on exactly what you want to show and how you want to show it. And you also have the option here, if you ever see this symbol, it makes it so that it can export directly to a Excel sheet. So just in the event that something, when you preview it, it's just not calculating the way you want it, you know, it will still calculate correctly, but if there's something else you want to add as far as another column or another calculation, then please feel free to just go ahead and export it, and then you can do everything that you need in Excel. So those are the three main reports. You know, there are obviously plenty of other ones depending on what you need, especially things like W-2 info or chart of accounts, or even budget projection, or just the worksheet, just to show what the work that you would put in for budgets if you wanted to review that. I'm not going to go over all of them, but if there is something specific you'd like me to go over, like if you had a specific dedicated accounts that you want to report on, then please feel free to let me know and I'll go over it towards the end of the webinar. So once you go ahead, print out your reports, you can review them. You're going to verify that all of your account figures are correct. If they're not, then you can definitely open up the account grid, look at the ledger, look at any of the registers for your transactions, and just make any changes that you need. Then you'll come back, you'll reprint the reports, and the moment that your data is accurate, then we're just ready to move on to the next year. So once all of those reports are finished, then next is going to be the year-end utility. Now the year-end utility is going to zero out all of your income and expense accounts, and it is going to move it to the next fiscal year. So it's very important that before any utility really is run, you're going to want to make an additional backup. So I'll just go ahead and exit out of here. We'll just exit out of finance real quick. We can go up here and choose to backup under tools. And whether or not this is checked out, it's going to create a backup for the entire database. You can never have too many backups. You can just always have one too few. I know your guys are going to get tired of me saying that, but I have seen many a customer who have been saved by a backup, and it saves them a lot of time and energy from having to either manually change something or otherwise just have to run a lot of different tasks just to get back to where they were. So after we create that backup, we're ready to run the year-end utility. So we'll go up here to utilities, and there's the year-end utility. Just because, you know, it's always nice to make sure that everything is as it should be. Our database system is accurate, but just always to make sure databases, they get corrupted, or their data just gets just a little residual every once in a while. So it's always a good idea that you also want to rebalance your finance module. So, I use big words like corrupted and database issues, not really big words, but either way, they sound scary, but just rebalancing your finance module, it essentially just takes your beginning balance and just applies all of the transactions again, just as a double check, really. And you can honestly rebalance everything as many times as you need. So if any report or something's not looking good and all of the transactions look correct, you might want to rebalance and see if the reports change. So it just takes just a couple seconds once you're making sure that no other users are actually in the finance module, because it's going to rebalance and recalculate everything. You're going to press OK. It just takes just a couple seconds, and it just kind of verifies that everything is as it should be. Then we'll go up here and run the year end. So it is going to give you a warning about creating a backup. We've already done that, so we'll say yes. And then we have the option to close the current fiscal year and move on to the next one. Right now I am on the 2020 fiscal year, and it's going to move to 2021, but the object still stands. So once you click this begin button, all of your income account and expense accounts, they're going to be zeroed out. So if you need to make any appropriate transfers before you do that, if you want to move anything to maybe a dedicated account, because all of your asset, liability, and dedicated accounts, all of those are going to carry over just fine. But for income and expense with equity accounts, they're always going to zero out. So once everything is correct and no other users are in the finance module, we'll click OK. and your year-end utility has been run. And you'll see right down here in this little green box here, it's a little hard to see, but in this little green box here, it will always show you what the fiscal year you are in. So in the event that you are behind, you can always just run the year-end utility up until your fiscal year is correct. And then once we go ahead and do that, I just always like to go back up here, just rebalance just one more time. You know, you can't do it too many times, and it's always good to just make sure with your financial data that you're going to be starting up with a nice clean slate. So essentially, after the year-end utility is run, anything, all of your account balances for your asset, liability, and dedicated accounts, all of those ending balances for 2020 in this example, they will be considered the beginning balance for the next year. So it's all just going to be the same. There's not going to be any differences. That's why we we greatly recommend against changing any sort of beginning balances, because that might affect any other reports from previous years, because it confuses the system when 1 year ending balance is not the same as the next year's beginning balance, and it thinks it's missed something. So it's always better to, instead of changing a beginning balance, to always create some sort of adjustment account to make sure that everything is starting out as it should be. So once the new fiscal year is here, the actuals are created and it will lock the previous fiscal year. So the only way to go back would be to reverse your fiscal year, but once everything looks as it should, you shouldn't need to do any corrections on a previous fiscal year. So if there's anything that looks a little wonky, we greatly recommend that you just create an adjustment within this fiscal year. So once the income and expense accounts are at 0, the asset, liability, and dedicated accounts have been moved forward. If you haven't run the utility in a while, like if you've noticed that your fiscal years are incorrect and you still are on a previous year, you can always just run the year-end utility up until you can get to that next fiscal year. So once we run the year-end utility, we've run the rebalance utility, everything is looking good. Turn off the to-do list. Everything else should be good. In addition to moving up the fiscal year, I forgot to mention, it does also renew any recurrent transactions as well. Once everything is finished, you know, everything that is required for the financial year is finished. But if you want to clean up your data, we do have the option to go up to utilities and click the cleanup utility. Now this can, it does delete and purge this information for good. So it is another recommendation to create a backup before running any of the cleanup utilities in any of the modules. And then once you go ahead and continue, you can choose exactly what you want to delete. And you can choose to delete specific transactions, inactive accounts if they don't have any transactions, any sort of account summaries, purchase orders, or any other options. And if you need to renew your recurrent transactions during the current fiscal year, you can just go ahead and run that, so that nothing is really nothing is lost. So the cleanup utility by no means is required. We do recommend keeping at least 2 years of financial data, so you're not going to want to run the cleanup utility every year, but just to make sure, you do have that option. I haven't run into an instance where a Shepherd staff database has overwhelmed a computer and made it run slow due to its sheer volume. So I say just go ahead, create backups, and if you want that historical data, just go ahead and keep it and just not have to run the cleanup utility if you don't want to. It's really just all completely up to you. So that was just kind of my overview of the financial year-end process. I have just a few things to review. We'll do the quiz, and then any and all questions I'll be happy to answer either within this webinar, or if I have to research it, I will email you as soon as I know something. So we'll go ahead and review. So as previously stated, we do recommend getting contributions, attendance, and membership information finished before running finance, just in the event that if you have contribution batches that turn into deposits, you just want to run them. But honestly, once contributions is finished, you can run your finance year end whenever, as it's pretty independent of the attendance, membership, and scheduler modules. So it can be done at any time. So it's always important just to remember basic steps. Just make sure you update all of your data. This includes all of your transactions, even if they can't be reconciled this year. Just make sure all of your transactions are entered. Make sure your budgets are entered, any sort of needed reports. Usually this includes the balance sheet, your statement of income and expense, and the general ledger report, along with anything that your administrator or denomination requires. So after we do that, just the year-end workflow, we definitely recommend making a backup. I'm just nailing this in, so I apologize, but it just gives you a good fallback point if anything goes wrong or anything is incorrect after running the year end. If something was incorrect and you run it, there's really not something you can really go back on. So you can either create an adjustment or you can restore a backup and then do the year-end process again. And it's always important that after the tasks have been made, you want to make sure your data is correct and verify any sort of changes that you need. And then you want to make a backup when the task is actually complete, just so in the event something in the coming year, something goes wrong, if you need to just start over with a clean slate, then you have that option. So I just have a small little quiz. Once I finish those, we'll get to the questions. So my question is, true or false? You can enter transactions for your next fiscal year, even if you haven't closed out your current fiscal year. Is this true or false? All right then. Looks like quite a few people are answering. All right then, I'll go ahead and close this. And I did lightly go over this, so I do understand if some people said false, but the answer is actually true. If the transactions are for the next year, then since the transaction is going to have a date, if it's within the next fiscal year, go ahead and enter in those transactions. Just anything that you have made, you want to make sure all of your transactions are put in, just for the sake of good data entry. And it won't affect this year's books. It will just make sure that everything is up as it should be. The next one is the cleanup utility should be run every single year. It is required. I was hoping to fool some people. Okay. The answer is false. So we do advise against running the cleanup utility, the year-end utility. That can definitely be run every year, but the cleanup utility that actually purges the data, since it's permanent, there's no going back. So it makes any sort of trends or analytical reports using any sort of historical data, it makes that pretty hard. So I'd say just keep as much information as you need in the event that you need to print a trend or historical report. And finally, if you select the option to check out finance when you're making a backup, only the finance information is going to be backed up. I definitely know I squawked this a lot. Okay, then. Sorry about that. I was just reviewing your questions. I'll go ahead and close this one. The checkout finance feature, it just causes a message to be displayed whenever someone opens finance. So in the event that you take a version of the database home and you want to make financial changes, you can mark that as being checked out. And anybody in the church, if they want to add in some financial data, they're going to get that message, so that when you restore your financial database back onto the church computer, it doesn't overwrite anything that was manually put in while you were gone. But as far as backing up the database and restoring the database, other than it overriding anything that might have been entered, it's pretty independent. So the backup utility will always back up everything, and you have the option, if you need to upload only your financial information. So let's see, we have a few questions. So let's just go ahead. All right. Let's see. Jeff makes a good question. Why aren't dedicated accounts shown in the chart of accounts? That was mostly me. I just don't think I have any dedicated accounts in my tree. So let's see. I open up accounts and just look at dedicated, I just don't have them. So in the event you just want to show the accounts tree, once you create one, I can do that real quick. then you'll be able to see that in the tree. So I apologize, I just didn't have a dedicated account available, but it will be shown in the chart of accounts if you have those. Let's see. If there was a contribution entry, so say if someone had entered in a batch wrong incorrectly in contributions and it had created a deposit, taking it from the contributions module into the finance module, then you would need not only to change that in contributions, but since that import is just a one-time process, just for data integrity, you would need to go and manually change that deposit in finance. So you would need to just track it down and deposit from batch. These would always be indicative of those who come from contribution batches. You can always go back in and change whatever the deposit is. So if you need to change the amount, if you need to change a fund or add a fund, then you can do that directly from the deposit register. And once everything's looking good, then you should be able to reconcile it once it goes through and gets to your bank statement. So good question. Please explain income and expense closing accounts on balance sheet. All right. So we're going to go back to the balance sheet. And this is another reason why we'll want to run these reports before actually running the year-end report. But once we select the balance sheet and preview it, it will show you the balances as of each date, depending on the ending date that you choose. Let's see. Is there a training module that covers dedicated account transactions? Yes, I do believe we do have 2 financial webinars that I can send to you, Jeff. And if they don't go into enough detail, then just feel free just to email me and I'll be happy to send you an email with all of those steps if you need that. Carol makes a good question. Is there a hard copy summary of the year-end process? Yes, there is. If you go to our help center, then we do have what is called a year-end document. So if you go to shepherdstaff.zendesk.com, then you'll be able to access all of our articles as well as things that we have brought up in our manual. And that will include a year-end document, including all of the processes that you need to do, including links to articles explaining each and every step of that process. So I can definitely send that over to you, Carol, no worries. Can the checkout finance option be done without the sysadmin access? Yes, anybody who has access to finance, they're able to check that out. So they'll be able to back up their database as well as check it out so that people know that changes are being made off-site, essentially. When doing a backup, can you add additional information to the file name to clarify what the backup contains? That's a good question. I don't believe so. I think it is specific to that particular backup. So if you create a backup, it is going to be a bunch of gobbledygook, to be honest. But thankfully, whenever you are looking at particular backups, you can definitely see that they have dates, and that's what I would use to determine exactly which backup it is you want to restore. So I would always use the date and the time just to show when it was that you created that backup and when you were going to restore it back to. In entering transactions for next year, does that include entering next year's budget? That can definitely happen. You can enter in budgets as early as you want. So if you want to add in 2022, if you want to add in 2023, if you'd like, whenever it is that you have a budget amount, you are more than welcome to enter that in. And in the event something changes, you always have the option to just go back into budgets and change it how you need. Where do retained earnings go? I will be honest, I'm not quite sure. I think since retained earnings, they might be a liability, but I'd have to research that, Barbara. I'm sorry, I don't have an immediate answer, but I can definitely get back to you once I have that information. Since I'm not an accountant, I don't always know what these terms mean, but I do know how the software works. So once I know what that particular what it is considered in accounting, then I can definitely show you how to relay that into the software. So thank you for your patience on that, but I will send you an email as soon as I finish this up. All right, was there any other questions that I could go over right now? Okay, well, I'll just add one more slide, maybe. And this will also include our support email and our support line. So if you run into any questions or concerns during your year-end process, please feel free to reach out to us. Year-end is a pretty busy year. It is a pretty busy time of year for us. So if you have to wait on the line, I do apologize, but we will absolutely get back to you as soon as possible. So if there's anything that I can do to make your year-end processes or any of your advent planning just a little less bumpy, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to help. You know, even if our coffee hasn't kicked in quite yet, we're still always happy to talk to you. So I hope everybody has a wonderful day and everybody keeps warm and safe and healthy, and I'll just see you next time. Thank you so much, guys.